So I want to share with you two scenarios. In one scenario, you meet a person that's dressed in tattered clothes, and they walk into an event, and they go and meet and mingle with people. And now you take a second scenario. They're all dressed up. They got like a pocket square. They're well presentable, and they go into the same event. So let me ask you a question. Who do you think will get better reception from the people at the event? If you responded with the second person, you're right. Why is that? Because from the outlook, is because the second person was able to create a perception of himself in the eyes of the other people at the event. Now, as superficial as it sounds, people judge based on first impressions. And I'm sure you heard that before. But at the same time, most of the people do not craft it in a way where it allows them to really bring out their strengths. Because if you think about it, if you meet someone for the first time and you only have perhaps a few milliseconds and maybe sometimes only a few seconds to make a positive impression on them, how would you do that? Of course, first is visual. As human beings, we are visual creatures, and how we look is one of the ways that crafts our perception. Now, another thing is, let's say you made a decent impression with how you present yourself, but how do you take it one step further? Let's say you are now having a conversation with them, and you have 5 minutes to really solidify this impression with the person. What do? A lot of times people would just wing it. They'll just ask random questions like, what do you do? How do you get here? How do you know so-and-so? And time just passes really quickly. But what you can do that helps you stand apart from everyone else is what I call a story bank. It's the act of telling stories, but calibrated stories that are specifically designed by you beforehand, so that in every occasion, every situation you find yourself in, you can find a particular story in the story bank and use it to present yourself in a positive light. Each of these stories that you will share with the person has a way of accentuating or showing your strengths, as well as complementing your weaknesses, without having to explicitly say that. Now, how do you tell someone that you are confident, that you're courageous, that you're hardworking, that you have grit, that you're patient? You wouldn't just tell them, hey, I'm a very courageous person, right? You wouldn't do that. You would share a story about yourself, a time where you actually faced hardships and you were able to get out of that. And you would merge this into the conversation itself based on what happens during the conversation. Now, let's say you're a startup pitching a company. What you want to do is you want to make a story, craft a story about your company and as you as the founder, so that the person that you're speaking with can get a sense of who you are, what your company represents, without having to spend a lot of time getting to know you. And how you do that is your stories, let's say you have 15-minute conversations, your stories will probably be 2 to 3 minutes each. And at the end of each story, there will be a particular message you want to highlight to that person, a particular attribute about yourself or your company that you want to highlight to that person. So that story needs to be, one, memorable, it needs to be timely, it needs to be based in the time frame of the event that you're attending. Right? It makes sense that you're sharing a particular story at a event. Now, let me give you an example of such a story. Let's say that there was a traffic accident recently, and your company sells solutions to prevent accidents. They help redirect traffic in real time. So, an example of a story is you can share about a time where you were traveling across crossing the street one time, and then the car just stops right in front of you, slams on the brake, almost crashes right into you. And even a simple story like that, you're invoking emotions in the other person. They're thinking about, oh wow, that could have very well have been them that's in that situation. And then you bring it to the conclusion, to the message where that situation could have been prevented if they were using the software. If you could depending on how you structure your story, you can have a different impact on the person. And the whole point is, people do not buy logically. They buy emotionally and they justify with logic. So with these stories, the whole point is to create emotion. And by creating emotion in the other person, you allow them to remember things that they otherwise would just forget and pass it as a piece of information. And the reason why people remember better when they associate something visual and emotional to it is because our brains are wired in a way where those things that are visual and emotional are connected to our more primitive brain, the side of our brain which keeps us alive. Whereas things that are more focused on logic, they're focused on information, they're in our more rational brain. So the rational brain is further up in our skull, and the blood flow first passes into this so-called primitive brain that controls our emotions and our breathing and all of our automatic responses. So if you learn to master the art of making a story bank, you will then be able to master the art of controlling your perception, other people's perception of you, without being manipulative, without being disingenuous or inauthentic. Much less, most people do not even share a story about themselves when they introduce, because to share something personal about yourself means you need to be vulnerable. So by doing all of this, having a story bank, keeping it to maybe 5 stories, and you can add more when the time goes on, you'll be able to help yourself stand out from all the other people trying to meet the same people you are, especially if you want to be memorable. And these stories don't need to be complicated. They're just something that needs to tell something about you, your company, what you represent, what your values are. And by doing so, you'll be able to slowly create influence for the people that you want to sell, influence, inspire, and so forth. So with that, if you like this video, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.